Hello and welcome back to my reflective space. Today I wanted to talk about rest. I think rest is something that a lot of us have probably been told to do. I know it's something that I've been told I need to do more of, or sometimes that I do too much of. But knowing what actual rest looks like and is, for me at least, isn't something that I knew about until very, very recently. I think it's common for rest to be looked down upon. You know, we typically idolize or look up to people that are doing so many different things. And especially nowadays, there's a lot more, at least from what I see, there's a lot more of this like hustle culture. I don't even know if that's the right way to phrase that, but just a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and that's really impressive and that's great, but is it healthy? Does it make us feel good? Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's bad to be doing a lot of things, but I do think sometimes there is a lack of emphasis on balance, and I think rest is such a key component of achieving that balance, and something that a lot of us don't really know how to actually engage with. I think rest can kind of be synonymous with sleep, lying down, doing things like watching TV or, I don't know, going on social media mindlessly. When we're not doing things that feel productive, are we resting? Rest in some way is the things that I describe, but I think an important component of rest is recovery, and it helping us to reset and rebalance ourselves. And I don't think that those things necessarily help us to do that. I mean, I know so many times when I've had a busy day in school, when I was in school or at university, or even just like being out all day, and the only thing I want to do is just go on my phone and watch YouTube and not really think about what it is that I'm doing or how it is that I feel. And I think that's completely fair enough. You know, it's not the case that we always have to be thinking about what we're doing, and that we can't have those moments of mindlessness where we do those things that, you know, maybe aren't helpful in getting us to feel recovered, but are also not harmful unless, you know, in large quantities. At the same time, I think it's really important to know how to actually rest in a way that helps us recover. And I came across this concept of the 7 different types of rest. And this was created by Dr Saundra Dalton-Smith. I think that's her name. I hope that I've said that right. But she basically introduced the idea that there are 7 different components of rest, and we need all 7 of them in some way in our lives. So I thought it might be helpful to talk through some of those 7 ways, share some of my reflections on them, and hopefully get you thinking about those aspects of rest and how you can actually achieve this like art of rest almost. So the first kind of rest is physical rest. I think this is probably the most common kind of rest that comes to mind when we think of the word rest. I'm going to say the word rest so many times in this, please bear with me. But physical rest is essentially, it could be things like sleep, it could be things like napping if that's what you need, but it could also be things like gentle movement, so things like yoga, stretching, a massage, things that kind of soothe our body but aren't necessarily so passive, things that are a bit more active. And as someone that practices yoga, I do think a lot of people think that it can be really easy and calming. It can actually be really challenging, but I think some forms of gentle yoga can be really good to help you rejuvenate, and it's something that I do both to build strength and build flexibility, but also to wind down. I think it's a really nice way to start your mornings and even work towards the evening and kind of wind down physically. The second type of rest is mental rest. Mental rest can go hand in hand with physical rest, but it's more focused on taking short breaks and giving yourself that mental break or rest. It's things like mindfulness. I know that term can be thrown around a lot, and I understand that there's a lot of hesitancy sometimes when we think of mindfulness, because like, what does that actually mean? Mindfulness, to me at least, is sitting with the present. So it might be, maybe you're doing a task and you take a short break and you just sit there and you just take in your surroundings. And I know that can kind of seem a bit silly and like, why would you do that? But I really do think it helps to take a moment away from something and just be present with yourself and lift that kind of mental burden almost of the pressure of whatever it is that you're doing. But mindfulness and mental rest can also be things like meditation. It could be things like journaling. There are so many different ways to practice mental rest, but I think the idea is essentially just to take short moments throughout your day to alleviate that kind of mental load that you might be carrying with you throughout the day. The third kind of rest is emotional rest. So that's kind of similar to mental rest, but more specifically related to your emotions, and taking breaks and giving yourself the time to feel your feelings and work through them in whatever way works for you. That might be spending time by yourself, spending time in nature and just taking in the surroundings. It could be talking through your feelings and expressing them to somebody that you trust. It could be writing them down, so journaling and writing out how you feel and working through your emotions that way. But dedicating that time to give yourself a moment to sit with what it is that you might be feeling and perhaps avoiding or suppressing is a great way to practice emotional rest, and such an important thing that I think a lot of the time we neglect, especially going back to what I said before, like this whole culture around productivity and always feeling like you have to do more all of the time. Emotions can kind of get sidelined and we don't really give them that importance that they deserve sometimes, because a lot of the time we just have to get things done and we don't feel that we have the time to sit with those feelings. I think all of that is true and not necessarily our fault. At the same time, if we can dedicate that short amount of time to practice emotional rest, maybe it's just 5 minutes every day, I think it can go a long way to counteract some of those bigger societal forces and pressures that we don't really have much control over. Linked to emotional rest, I think all of these types of rests are kind of linked in some way, is social rest. So this is the fourth type of rest. This is spending time with the people that uplift you, that fulfill you, and that support you. I think this one to me was where I felt like there was quite a fine line between this being helpful and this being not. It's really important to be able to identify the kind of people that you're around and how they are affecting you. It's a very common thing to be influenced by the people that you're around, and I've seen that change in myself depending on the kind of people that I've surrounded myself with and the kind of person that I then present myself as or feel that I am, or kind of become influenced to be, and sometimes that's not really the person that I want to be. So I think evaluating the kind of people that are lifting you up, making you feel good about your life, and the kind of people who might not be doing that. I would say that evaluating whether or not people are uplifting you and not is a very hard thing to do. It's not easy, and for me, the easiest way to tell when it feels like rest is when I come back from hanging out with a person or group of people and I feel good, I feel better, I feel energized. There's been times where I've met up with people and then afterwards I feel really drained. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad for me, but sometimes it might be that they're not uplifting or making me feel good about my own life or myself. So maybe thinking about social rest also in terms of, how do these people make you feel after you've seen them? Do you feel more energized? Do you feel that rest? Do you feel the benefits of that rest? Does that feel restful? How do you feel recharged? I think those are important things to think about when you're evaluating whether these people are actually helping you to achieve social rest or not. The fifth kind of rest is sensory rest. I think this is the one that, at least for me, it is the hardest to achieve. There is so much noise all the time, and I don't necessarily mean like literal noise, but like so much stimuli, whether that's from my phone, from the internet, from my environment at times. There is just a lot going on a lot of the time, and especially with social media, we are so exposed to so much all of the time, and it's so easy to feel overstimulated, especially in terms of like our senses, like literally feeling like there is way too much going on. I think ways to achieve social rest might literally just be turning down the brightness on your phone or turning off your phone. Stop turning off like any noise in the environment. So it might be like turning off the video that you're playing or the music that you're listening to. I'm somebody that really enjoys listening to and watching things while I do other things, like even just getting ready. I love to listen to music or a podcast or watch YouTube while I'm getting ready for bed. In some way it makes me feel better because I'm kind of amping up the noise in my brain so that I don't have to think about how I feel or whatever it is that my brain is trying to think about. I know that sometimes I just don't want to deal with it, and so it's easier to kind of block out that chatter in my brain by putting something on than sitting with it. But I know this is a really important one for me to practice, is sensory rest, and taking that time before bed to do something that might feel challenging and uncomfortable, like just sitting with how I feel, or doing something that's a bit less stimulating, like reading a book. That's something that I really enjoyed to do when I was younger, and I just don't do it as much anymore. But I know that those things will make me feel better, even if in the short term they are uncomfortable to work towards doing. You know, I know that in the moment it feels good to have music on, and I don't think having music on is a bad thing. I love listening to music, and I'm not going to stop. But it's those moments where maybe, you know, in the mornings, maybe it's choosing something that's a bit less intense, a bit less overstimulating. A lot of the music that I like to listen to is quite loud, so listening to music that's a bit calmer really helps me. So it's like making those small changes to work towards achieving that rest. I think that's the way in which it helps me to think about it, not as this like drastic change, but maybe as something smaller that I can work towards. The sixth kind of rest is creative rest. This one to me didn't feel as intuitive in terms of how it might fit into our lives, but once I actually took the time to understand what that meant, I do think it's actually probably one of the most important ones and one of the most underlooked ones. So creative rest is taking the time to focus on the things that bring you inspiration, the things that help you to get out of maybe some sort of writer's block-esque feeling. It could be looking at things like art and media. It could also be spending time in nature. I feel like that's a common one that has so many benefits. Creativity is such a key component of our lives, and I think it's kind of hidden, but anything to do with problem solving, coming up with ideas, these are things or skills that I think we use in our day-to-day lives in like every single aspect. Creatively thinking about things is something that I think is innate to everybody. I don't think it's like you're creative, right-brained or something like that. I know that kind of idea of like you're either left-brained, logical, or right-brained, creative was kind of floating around on the internet at some point, but I think every single person has creativity to them. And we use it in such different ways, and that's the beauty of it, that it has such versatility. So creative rest, I think, is so important, especially if you're dealing with tasks, ways of approaching things, situations where you're not sure how to move forward or navigate them. Creative rest can be the solution to that, perhaps, and taking that time away to gain that inspiration and come back towards that task with a different perspective and new ideas of how to problem solve and work towards wherever it is that you want to be. The seventh and final form of rest is spiritual rest. Spiritual rest to me is also one of the most important ones, but I think the one that feels the least applicable to a lot of people. I think it can feel synonymous with things like religion, but I don't think that it has to be. I think that I personally have a spiritual connection, and to me that's just some sort of connection to anything that's greater than myself. I think, or I believe in that connection because it brings me a sense of purpose. It makes me feel more connected to the life that I'm living, and I don't think that has to be a bad thing. Whether or not you have religious or spiritual ties, I still think spiritual rest is so important, and probably the most holistic kind of rest that we can get. In terms of how you could practice it could be things like prayer, if that's something that you do. It could be meditation, but it could also be engaging more with your community. It could be giving back to your community, thinking more local. How can you integrate yourself more into community and connect with others? It is kind of up to you how you define spiritual rest, but I would just say, just because it has spiritual in the title, I think sometimes we can kind of be a bit intimidated by it or write it off. But consider the ways in which you work towards feeling a sense of purpose and connectedness in your life, whether that's through a belief in something more or not, or anything else, a belief in anything. What purpose does that serve you with, and how can you work towards appreciating it and connecting with it in a way that you might not already be? For me, I feel like my connection with spirituality is very individual. I don't really impose it on anybody else or think that anybody has to think like me. I think it's so important to me to help keep me grounded, help to guide me throughout my life, and help me to make sense of the things that I experience. And I know it's not for everybody, but I do think finding some way that you can connect with it is really important, even if it's not exactly the same as everybody else. It's such an individual thing, and it has so many benefits for us, especially in terms of our well-being when we prioritize it. I know when I first looked at these 7 kinds of rest, it felt very overwhelming, now I have to think about all the different kinds of rest that I need, and that feels like another mental burden in itself. But I think remembering that it is the small steps that help you to get there, and focusing on things like quality and duration and building those things up is the most important thing. And also knowing that you're never going to achieve all 7 kinds of rest perfectly, and that's not really the goal. I think the goal is more being able to acknowledge what kind of rest you need right now and in this moment, or in a period of life where you are struggling with rest, and engaging with it and practicing it. So thinking about it in terms of reflective questions that you could ask yourself, I have 2 questions that I think would probably help. The first one being, what kinds of rest am I currently engaging with? So what kind of rest are you currently making time for? And in what ways, thinking about and listing out the time that you currently allocate to rest. And maybe that helps you to create an awareness of the areas in which you are making time for yourself to rest. But maybe it's also helping you to acknowledge that you aren't taking that time in the way that you would like to be. And that's the first step to me, is that awareness, understanding this is where I'm at right now, this is what I am doing, this is what I'm not doing. And then the second question might be, what kinds of rest do I need right now? So especially if you're in a place where you notice and you recognize that you're not practicing that rest in the way that you would like to, thinking about what kinds of rest do you know that you need? Is it you need more time with the people that fulfill you? You need that social rest? Is it that you need more sensory rest and you're feeling quite overstimulated a lot of the time? Reflecting on what it is that you've noticed in yourself over the past, week, 2 weeks, however long you want to think about it as, and considering what kind of rests you need and how you can integrate that into your life in a way that works for you. It could be the smallest of ways, and in fact I would encourage it be the smallest of ways to start with, because I don't think it will feel as restful if you jump to a place where you're not ready to be at in terms of taking time to rest. When we live in a culture that promotes productivity and always doing things, it's not easy to then give ourselves the time to rest. but small actions can help us to get there, and I don't believe that it's impossible. Building in time to rest is a really important form of self-care, and it's a way of demonstrating to yourself that you deserve rest, irrespective of what especially individualistic cultures tell us we deserve rest. And building in that time is showing yourself that you deserve it, and that in itself is such an important thing to be able to say that you can do and that you can show yourself. Learning to rest takes time, and being able to evaluate our needs is one of the most important things, but something that will build up over time as you do it more and as you practice reflecting on what it is that you need, especially when it comes to rest. I hope that you found something that you can take from this episode, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.